All right. So I've been gone for a couple of weeks, and as we're going through this series, Heroes, and I don't know that anyone sets out in life who's like, I want to be a hero. I don't know, maybe so. And typically that's why we think, well, we couldn't be one, even if we wanted to be one, because typically it's just average people doing extraordinary things, and they make decisions that kind of set them up, and maybe it's a generation looking back that's like, oh man, that was extraordinary. But it was just an average person making decisions that kind of led to that place. And as I was thinking about heroes, and maybe specifically heroes of the faith, I think as you peel back the layers of it and see what's going on behind the scenes, there's a couple things that I see very, very clearly, and I wanted to be able to share those with you. But one of those is heroes of the faith have a deep, abiding trust in the sovereignty of God. They have a very, very deep trust that God is sovereign. And so circumstances don't faze them. Negative circumstances, they're unfazed by that. Life can hit them in the mouth and they're unfazed. Because they see that as an opportunity because God is sovereign. And so here's the circumstance that I find myself in, whether I caused it or whether it just came my way and hit me. But no matter what it is, I'm going to see this as an opportunity to be God's light in this situation. And so they're just kind of unfazed by it, which is so different than the average American Christian. The average American Christian is basically, I'm building my kingdom. I'm not necessarily interested in building God's kingdom. I'm kind of building my kingdom, and I want to go to heaven when I die. So I put my faith in Jesus, so I'm going to go to heaven when I die, but I kind of want to just build my kingdom, and I want God to help me do it. And so, top shelf is really me and whatever is necessary for me to build my kingdom. And if I get my back against the wall or if circumstances get a little tough, I want to pull God out and God's supposed to help. And in fact, we kind of think, man, religion for us, church for us, God for us is a box. And we do whatever we got to do to check a couple boxes, I can, maybe even go to the extent where I open my Bible and read it on a, daily or every other day basis, maybe once a week. I pray once a week. I even gave some money at that church. I gave a little bit of money. And God, I went to church 4 weeks in a row, for crying out loud. Now you owe me. I'm doing really good here. I've been a really good person, and I've done some really good stuff, and I'm kind of on the straight and narrow right now. So God, you should iron my life out. In fact, my life should get easier because, God, you owe me. And so when a negative circumstance comes along, and if that's you, a negative circumstance comes along, and you're like, what's up with this, God? We see it as God is doing something to us. We don't see it as an opportunity to be His light. No, God's doing this to me, and I have no idea why He's doing this to me. Maybe He doesn't love me. Maybe He's just punishing me. Maybe He's not good after all. And we think, maybe God isn't sovereign. But see, heroes of the faith, they have a deep, abiding trust. They trust that God is sovereign, and they're unfazed by the circumstances of life, no matter how difficult it becomes. I'm reminded of the Apostle Paul. You just open the pages of Scripture, and I don't know where we get that if we check a few boxes, God's going to make my life easy. Because you just start reading the Scriptures, you're like, well, that didn't happen to anybody who was following God. You look at the Apostle Paul. Here's a guy who probably had more faith than all of us put together. He was unbelievable. Talk about a guy who walked with Jesus. Talk about a guy who was all in. Talk about a person who was like, Jesus is my all in all, and I'm living for Him on a daily basis. And look at his life. He's shipwrecked. I would think, okay, God, I thought you wanted me to go over there, but on the way, we instead almost drowned. So what are you doing to me? But the person who doesn't see it that way, the person that trusts in the sovereignty of God says, in God's sovereign will, He knew we were going to be shipwrecked. And so, God, in this situation, I don't know exactly what it is you want to do, and I don't know exactly what it is you want to do through me, because I thought you wanted me to get over there, but obviously you knew this was going to happen. So I just want to be your light in this situation. Here's a guy who was stoned to within an inch of his life. He could have said, thanks a lot, God. I serve you, and what do you do to me? You have people throw rocks at me. That's awesome. Instead of, you know what? This is just part of it. He was beaten to within an inch of his life, flogged. He was imprisoned several times. He had a physical ailment. We're not exactly sure what it is. All we know is it was so bad, it bothered him so much, he asked God 3 different times to take it away. And 3 different times, God said, no. And do you see what happens to Paul's faith after he asked God to remove this? After all, I'm doing all of this for you, God. The least you could do is take this physical ailment away from me, and I could actually serve you a little bit better. And God turns around and says, no, because in your weakness, my strength is magnified. So I'm not taking it away. But Paul doesn't have a pity party and go, oh, he just says, you know what? A deep, abiding trust in the sovereignty of God. It's amazing. Heroes of the faith, they know that God is sovereign, and they're just kind of unfazed by the negative circumstances that life brings. And they understand being a Jesus follower doesn't mean my life is easy. It isn't. Bad things still happen to good people. And that's why Paul got to a place where he was able to say in Philippians 1:21, for to me to live is Christ. For me to live is Christ. Christ is top shelf. Jesus is top shelf for me. Everything else is underneath that, but Jesus is top shelf. And that's why he was able to say, and to die is gain. So let me ask you a question. For you to live is what? For you to live, what would you say? I mean, you say, for me to live right now, if I was being honest with myself, top shelf for me, number 1 priority in my life, this is what I'm living for. This is what I think about. This has all of my time. This has all of my resources. This has all of my attention. Top shelf for me. For me to live is, for some of you, it's say, my children. For me to live is my children. And that seems really worthy. Like, I live for my children. For some of you, it's your work. It's like, I work sun up, sun down. In fact, I put all of my identity in my work. It's just, that's who I am. That's what I do. And I work. That's what I do. That's where all of my energy goes to. That's what I live for. I live for work, and I love it. For me to live is golf. Some of you are like, come on, Eric. Let me leave that one out of there. Dadgummit. I mean, come on. You got to leave some stuff off of there. For me to live is golf. Some of you are like, I wish. For me to live is hunting. For me to live is guns. For me to live is my portfolio, my retirement, my investments. For me to live is to see my wealth grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. That's for me to live. That's what I live for. That's where all of my time is spent trying to figure out how to increase my wealth. For me to live is my toys. And the more toys I have, that's just what I live for. For me to live is the lake. For me to live is sports. For me to live is wrestling. For me to live is basketball. For me to live is football. For me, I hope for you to live isn't soccer. I mean, at least make it football or something. But, I guess if it's soccer, we could talk later. But anyway, for me to live is what? What is it? Because here's the thing. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. If you are living for anything other than Christ, you could never say dying is gain. You ever thought about that? Anything else other than Jesus that you put top shelf in your life, you could never say dying is gain on the back end of that. Because you're going to lose it. So dying isn't gain in that scenario. Jesus is the only one who brings gain in both living and in dying. In both places, you gain. I don't know of anything else where you have gain in both. It's only in Jesus. Do you find gain in this world and in the next? That's why Jesus said in Luke 9:24, he says, if you try to hang on to your life, so I'm trying to gain. If you try to hang on to your life, you're going to lose it. That's why for me to live is Christ. If for me to live is anything other than Christ, that's me trying to hang on to my life. And I've made it top shelf. That's me hanging on to it. Paul said, hey, if that's the case, then for you to live isn't Christ and dying isn't gain. And Jesus says you're hanging on to your life, but you need to know you're going to lose it. There's going to come a day and time when that will be gone. And either your children, even your children will die before you or you'll die before them. You're going to lose them too. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you will save it. But this causes a tension. And the tension in making Christ your life is that it requires sacrifice, and that sacrifice feels like a death. There's a tension in making Christ top shelf. Because if I make Jesus top shelf, that means I'm going to have to prioritize some of my life. And that's what I think. It's my life. But when I prioritize Jesus top shelf, I realize it's not even my life. I was bought with a price. It's no longer I who live, but what? Christ who lives in me. So it's not even I who live, but it's Christ living in me. And his life works his way out. So if Jesus comes, and I feel like, man, Jesus is calling me to come over here and do this. You know what that's going to do? That's going to require some time. And time is your life. But if Jesus isn't top shelf, do you think you're going to sacrifice some time? Heck no. No, I ain't going to do that. Why? Because that's not top shelf. I have other things that are top shelf. Do you create time around those other things that are top shelf? You betcha. I'll sacrifice that. Because I don't see it as a sacrifice. But when I have Jesus top shelf, there's a tension. That's why I don't want to make Jesus top shelf. Because I don't want it to be not my life. It's Jesus' life. And if he wants me to do this, and I feel like this is what he's asking me to do, all you campers, you work sun up to sundown. It's a ginormous sacrifice. It's the price of Jesus' top shelf. And what do you get paid? Almost nothing. See? It's a tension. It's a tension in making Christ your life. It requires sacrifice, and that sacrifice feels like a death. And then Jesus comes along and says, hey, if you're going to make me top shelf, you need to understand, your money actually isn't your money. I know you feel like you earned it, and it's yours, but I just need to tell you, I own it all. And whatever you have has been entrusted to you. I gave it to you, and I want you to manage it for me. And you just need to know that if you're going to manage it for me, then I want you to give first, I want you to save second, I want you to live on the rest. And I'm going to show you how to manage your money, but you just need to know that a part of that, I want you to give first. Because that's how you guard your heart from greed. Well, you know what happens when you give first? Instead of doing everything that I want to do and spending it all around what's top shelf for me, and if there's anything left over to, give a little bit to the church, we don't even see it as funding the kingdom of God. We don't see it as, that it's God's money and I'm managing it for Him. No. If there's anything left over, then maybe, but guess what? There's never anything left over. And so if you're going to put Jesus top shelf, it's going to be a sacrifice in terms of what you feel like financially is, man, this is what's been placed in my hands. And what I could have spent this on that would have been normally top shelf, now I'm looking at how can I give it away? It's a tension. It's a sacrifice. It feels like a death. That's why we don't do it. That's why we don't make Jesus our life. That's why there's other things that keep taking its place, taking His place. But what you need to know is heroes always sacrifice deeply. They always sacrifice deeply. That's why children, when they become adults and they look back at their parents, usually once they have children of their own and they're looking back, they're like, oh man, who was your hero? My parents were my hero. That was unbelievable, what? Sacrifice. Because they typically sacrifice an enormous amount for the children. I want to kind of give you an example of a sacrifice that kind of played itself out in the next generation, and just an extraordinary story. So Jen and I, when we lived for a time in Hot Sulphur, Colorado, and we were building our log home in Granby at the time, and we were renting this duplex in Hot Sulphur, and we were attending Hot Sulphur Community Church, and there was a couple from Kremling, Colorado, that would come and gather with the church there, and they were mentors of Jen and mine, and they had friends, Jim and Kathy Yost, who owned and operated the Latigo Ranch. It was a dude ranch in Kremling, and Jim and Kathy, when they were younger, Jim was an anthropologist. And he spent 10 years living with the Waorani tribe in Ecuador in the jungle, and as an anthropologist, and lived there. And they have a daughter, and their daughter grew up a good part of her growing up years in the jungle with them, with this tribe. And so Jim, I got to meet him and talk with him, and his daughter had married and then was going to be moving back to Ecuador and to live with the Waorani tribe again. And so they were down there, and part of the work that they were doing, they brought 3 Waorani gentlemen to the States and brought them to Kremling. Now get this. These were 3 Waorani tribe who had never left the jungle. Okay, I just said 3 guys who had never left the jungle, ever. Like, they don't have Wi-Fi. Like, it was like, okay, you're gonna need to wear some pants. Like, what are pants? Okay, well, let's go over this. Can you even imagine Okay, I'm not sure it's coming across quite clearly enough. Can you imagine getting on an airplane? You grew up in a jungle. You're like, I'm getting on an airplane. Can you imagine experiencing the United States of America after just living in the jungle? I mean, it was just like mind-blowing for these guys. Well, Jim asked us if we would want these three guys to come and gather with the church in Hot Sulphur. We were just like, yeah, that would be phenomenal. So these three guys come, and then they got around a drum, and they drummed these chants in Walrani chant. I don't know what it was in English, I can tell you that. So we didn't understand any of it. But Jim said what they've done, and he's like, you got a very, very short version. What they do is, he's like, lots of times they'll just go around in the evenings and they'll chant, and they start with creation and they walk their way all the way to Jesus. Now, so here's three guys who have heard the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ and entrusted their lives to him. Go a generation before. The only reason they knew anything about that was because of 5 missionaries who spotted this tribe as they were flying, and so they wanted to make contact with them, and so they started flying and actually dropping gifts to this tribe. And they did this for a period of time until they felt like they could actually make some inroads and land. And so these 5 guys landed on this river beach in a Piper Cub and made contact with this Walrani tribe. And at first, it seemed like it was going really well until it wasn't. And those 5 guys were speared to death on the banks of the river. Deep sacrifice. Where's the sovereignty of God now? Circumstance that seemed lost and hopeless. 2 of those guys were Jim Elliott and Nate Saint. Nate Saint was the pilot. Jim Elliott, 3 other guys. Jim Elliott's wife, Elizabeth, ended up in time actually moving and making contact with that tribe again, and was invited to actually move and live with the tribe, which she did. Nate Saint's son, Steve, was this tall when that happened. And Steve grew up in the jungle along with Elizabeth and his mom, teaching the Walrani tribe about Jesus. Steve became close friends with this older man who became a father figure to him, Minkaye. And Steve would learn that Minkaye had given his life to Christ. That he had a relationship with Jesus. But Minkaye was the one who murdered his father. Deep sacrifice. Deep sense in which God is sovereign. You see, the only reason a generation later there was 3 guys who had a relationship with Jesus and was able to come to the U.S. and tell us the story and chant for us the story of creation to Jesus is because of deep sacrifice of people who believed that God was sovereign no matter what the circumstance. See, I guarantee you, Jim Elliott and Nate Saint had no idea the impact they would make. They had no idea that there would be a tribe who would give their life to Jesus. And you have no idea. And you have no idea what your sacrifice will make in someone else's life. That's why Jim Elliott was able to say, he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep. Anything that you make top shelf, you can't keep it. So you're not a fool in giving that up, even though the entire world will say you are. You are no fool to give that up because you can't keep it anyway, to gain what you cannot lose. Gain in this life, gain in the next. It's the only place you'll find it. See, heroes always sacrifice deeply because they have a deep trust in the sovereignty of God. So what is top shelf for you? That you are ultimately living for, that you would say, dying would not be gain. Is there something that's top shelf for you that you would say, if I was to die today, that would be lost. That would not be gain. Dying would not be gain. That should be a trigger for you. That should be the point of reference for you to say, okay, that's where some work needs to be done. If you're here today, you have never given your life to Christ. You've never placed your faith in Jesus. In fact, you've never thought, Jesus brings gain in this life and gain in the next. And I've been racking my brain, Eric. I can't think of anything that bring gain in both other than him. So I want to invite you, because it's a decision. It's a decision to place your faith in Jesus, and some of you have placed your faith in Jesus, but you keep putting something else top shelf. Come on, let's be honest. And your checkbook reflects that. Your scheduling reflects that. Because you're not sacrificing anything for that. Something else is top shelf. And it's time for course correction. So if that's you, identify it, and then let's make a decision. Say, okay, you know what? It might be hard. I guarantee it will be hard. Because you get into your routines and it's hard to break out of it. You guys serving at camp, you know, it's easy right now because it's all kind of structured for you. But when you leave camp, it's not easy. So, crossing, what's top shelf for us? Because what's top shelf for you individually is what you will bring to the life of the church. And that's what will be top shelf for the church as well. So, let's be a church that maintains and keeps Jesus top shelf. It will take sacrifice. It will take a managing attention, and it will take believing that God is sovereign no matter what happens. Would you pray with me? Father, I pray for those that may not have a relationship with Jesus, and I pray that right now they would just say to you in their heart that, Jesus, I want you to be a part of my life. I want forgiveness of sin. I ask you for forgiveness of sin. I want to trust you. I want to put you top shelf in my life. Father, if there's someone here that they have a relationship with Christ, but Jesus isn't top shelf. If they're honest with themselves, there's other things. God, I pray that you would give them the courage Now that they know and now that they see it, it's one thing to see it. It's a whole nother thing to do something about it. So I pray that you give them the courage to do it. Father, I pray for the life of this church. Father, it will only exuberate life as long as this church makes Jesus you top shelf. So I pray that we would do that we would be willing to make that sacrifice, and we will trust that you are a good, sovereign God.